Members, we have already formed a quorum. We have actually passed the scheduled time, so let's invite the deputations and the administration to join us. Please take your seats.
歡迎各位
Welcome to you all. So please take your seats. Today is a special meeting to meet with deputations on measures to tackle under-occupation in public rental housing estates. I'd like to welcome the administration team and the deputations who are here. So we have a total of 50 plus deputations and individuals. So we're going to divide the meeting into two sessions. The first one from 2:30 to 3:55, and then the second one would be from 5 minutes past 4 to 5:30. Before we start with each session, please note that in front of you we have tabled a guideline for members of the public in attendance of this council's meeting with regard to security measures, and also in the letter sent out to you by the Secretariat, we have also attached the guidelines, so please note the guidelines, and if you don't have a copy with you, please inquire with the security guards around. And each deputation will be given 3 minutes. We will first invite the deputations or individuals to speak, and your remarks and submissions will not be protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Besides, I'd also like to remind members that we have earpiece before you, and you can tune into the relevant channel. Channel 0 is Floor, Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is English, and Channel 3 is Putonghua. So we will invite the deputations to speak first. Each will be given 3 minutes, and then we will invite the administration to respond, and then the floor will be open to members for questions and answers. So we now begin with session 1. From the official side, we have Mr. Albert Lee, Deputy Director from the Housing Department, Mr. Leung Sai Chi, Assistant Director from the Housing Department, Mr. Virgil Chu, Chief Manager, Housing Department, Mr. Lui Kwong Fai, Chief Manager, Housing Department. Welcome to all 4 of you. So let's get started. So the timer will start. First, Mr. Jacky LIM. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Housing Authority, for taking action now because it has been misleading the public for 7 years and it's also a misuse of public resources. I have to stress that I'm actually a former or an ex-PUO who has been evicted by the Housing Department, and given my experience, I can share with all members here as well as political parties here. I think it's very clear. Well, for PUO, I would not call it recanting, but then I've been forced out or evicted. I don't know. Well, I've submitted a 13-page submission. I don't know how many members have read it. Well, actually, I've set out in detail that, well, if the household accepts recanting, then that would only add to the number of larger units by 1. But then for the small units, that would be reduced by 1. And there is no change at all in terms of the number. And for people who have yet to reach 60, and if they are able-bodied, actually, there is no way that they can refuse the offer by the Housing Department for recanting. And actually, I have to spend some $20,000 on that, but then the Housing Department would only offer me some $4,000. So what if I cannot afford to pay the difference? Then nothing can be done about it. And on top of that, Section 19 of the Housing Ordinance, what has it given any power to the Housing Authority to recover the unit under these circumstances? Is totally silent. That's why I'd like to ask Mr. Lee to answer my question direct. That is, during the past 6 years, I've been asking this question time and again, and yet nobody has given me any reply. With regard to the recanting of PUO, that's not going to help with the supply of PRH units. Then why has it why do you have to do it? And also, I've been asking this on numerous occasions with regard to the ability to enforce section or term 22 of the tenancy agreement. So have you ever faced with this issue? That is, even if you do not have enough money, that's your problem, that's not mine. And also, it's not just about the resources. Well, are you able to enforce term 22 and also section 19 of the Housing Ordinance? So has it given any power to the Housing Authority to recover the unit in this way? And also for people who have yet to reach 60, and if they are able-bodied, they cannot refuse the offer. So has does the Housing Department have to accept the fact that you're actually evicting people? And also in Singapore, the smallest unit in public housing would be 500 square feet. But then in Hong Kong, the average per capita space is, if it's over 15 square meter, then it's already over or under-occupied. So should you have revised or adjusted it in accordance with the time? Time's up. Next, Dr. Mannick, he's not here. So next is Youth Civics, Ms. Bonnie Leung. Thank you, Chairman. Before we state our stance, I'd like to mention this. Before I enter, something happened. Actually, all along, well, for deputations, well, before we came in, we would go through security check. But then this afternoon, when I came in, I found something strange because supposedly this is a public hearing, is to hear the views from the public. But then when I was queuing up, well, a gentleman was in front of me, and then he was wearing a T-shirt with a slogan on the front, but then he was asked to put in another jacket before he was allowed to come in. So as a public hearing, you're supposed to hear public views. So is that a way or attitude to listen to public views? Well, I would not put the blame on the security guard out there because he's just acting on instructions. But then for this council as a whole, you will have to think about it. So should it be the attitude that you adopt in listening to public opinions?
I'd like to state the position of Civic Party on POU. I think the government is now tightening the standard. The government is trying to increase the supply of public housing units through such transfer in order to meet the target of, satisfying the 3-year deadline. So we now have 5,000 one-person households which are POUs. At the same time, we have about 2,000 applicants who are singletons or elderly citizens applying for PRH. If the government wants to assist single persons to be allocated PRH, the waiting time for the single person will be even longer. I hope the government will also adjust its policies to see whether or not some fine-tuning is called for. And I think I think the government would also need to be more humanistic, because you may have people who may have the spouses joining them in Hong Kong, or they may have children born, or these people have been promised by the administration that they can stay in the unit for a long time, and all of a sudden they become a POU. Some people might have just finished with their, the decoration of the flat, and just because the government is now tightening the policy, or there may be a change in the circumstances of the household, such as a member passing away, they will need to be transferred to a different unit, and they may have to incur additional expenses. When the housing department deal with these cases, although they have the discretion, but electrical members from the Civil Party and the Complaints Division of Electrical often receive complaints, and many of these cases have not been resolved. So that the department want to meet the target and try to have these households transferred as soon as possible. The Civil Party would like to have a system to deal with these cases, rather than just force the people to leave just by applying a single standard. Although we agree with the government that we need to effectively use public resources, but I think the ultimate solution is to increase the supply of PRH units. Next, we have Federation of Public Housing Estates, Mr. Woo Kin Man. Thank you. We object to the policy of tightening the policy in respect of POU, and I'd like to make 3 points. I think the policy goes against the principle of the objective of improving people's living standard. Previously, the Housing Department had allocated larger units for households which had to be transferred, and we supported that. As the policy regarding under-occupation is being tightened, should there be any drop in the size of the household that will become POUs, they will either be transferred to smaller units, or their tenancy is terminated. We do not think this is reasonable or fair. It is also against the objective of improving the living standard of the PRH tenants. The Housing Authority has been steadily tightening the standard, and it has made no commitment on relieving the overcrowded conditions of many PRH households. For tenants who live below the prescribed limit could apply for larger units, but that has never been done. On the other hand, the government is actually tightening the policy in respect of under-occupation, and secondly, extending the waiting time for elderly applicants for PRH. Right now, we have about 250,000 people on the waiting list. Single persons or elderly make up about 120,000, and every year only a few thousand is allocated to these people. For the POUs households, very often they have to leave the larger units and move into 1 to 2 person households. As a result, there is a scramble for the smaller units. So there is no increase in the actual number of PRH units, and at the same time, a lot of friction is being caused. Thirdly, for those who are over the age of 65, I think they should be exempted. The amendment to the under-occupation policy would result in those households with members aged between 60 to 69 being subject to a lot of nuisance. For those who are over the age of 60 and members who are not yet 70, they will be put on to at the back of the waiting of the list. But for many households with senior citizens, they are under a lot of pressure because they don't know when they will be asked to be transferred to another unit. Normally, the household adopt the threshold of 60 years when in providing suitable, living environment for the people. Obviously, the under-occupation policy goes against that objective. We hope for those who are between 60 to 69, they should be exempt from the policy in respect of under-occupation. Next, Mr. Lee Chi-keung from the Liberal Party. Until the end of June 2016, the number of people on the waiting list for PRH were already exceeded 230,000. The government has always promised that people applying for PRH will be able to allocate a unit within 3 years, but the actual figure shows that only about half, 50% of the applicants will be allocated a unit within 3 years. You have 24%, 40%, and 6% who will only be allocated in the 4th, 5th, and 6th year. And in Hong Kong, there are many subdivided flats totaling about 17,000 such units, 170,000 people living in these flats. Many of the people living in subdivided flats are peerage applicants. Many of them already have the assets or income exceeding the threshold and are forced to pay expensive rent. For voluntary agencies like Caritas have conducted surveys in some people and found that 60% of the tenants living in subdivided flats only have 5.5 square meters per person, and compared with 12.9 square meters per person is only slightly better. In the light of the above, and looking at the figures provided by the Housing Authority, in defining the POU, and the threshold is 25 and 30 square meters. I think that is a bit too lenient. For those who are on the waiting list and those living in subdivided flats, it's not fair. So we're actually wasting the precious resources of public housing units. The Liberal Party proposed that we should further tighten its policy in respect of under-occupation of peerage units, and also tighten the threshold by 10%. The POU is eligible to offer 3 offers to be transferred to another peerage units. The Liberal Party believes that this will only slow down the relocation of the under-occupied units. We believe that the number of offers should be reduced from 3 to 2 so that we can make better use of resources. At the same time, we propose, and we would like to encourage the government to encourage the POUs to be transferred earlier. The Liberal Party believes that other than providing allowances or subsidies to help these households to transfer to different units, they should also provide for additional allowances to pay for the fitting out of the new units. Given that the retirement age now is about 65, if the administration requires those people who have already retired to be transferred, we believe that that is not too humane. We propose, therefore, that for those who are over the age of 60, those over 60 should be taken out of the POU list, and that the threshold should be below the 65. Next, we have Mr. Low Keenman from Civil Force. Well, peerage units is a precious social resource involving a lot of public subsidy. Furthermore, the supply of peerage units is very tight. The government has to ensure peerage resources are used efficiently and optimally to meet the needs of those in need. I believe most people in Hong Kong would agree. According to the Housing Department standard, the standard for overcrowdedness is that for anyone living with less than 5.5 square meter per capita, for peerage units is about 13.3. So, in other words, the overcrowded units and the under-occupied households, their per capita space is there's a difference of 5 times. According to the information available, nearly 90% of the 1-person, 2-person under-occupied units are occupying 25 to 85 square meters, and such units could actually be allocated to 3-person households. We believe that we should make better use of these larger units. Furthermore, those on the waiting list, there is a strong demand for 2 to 4-person units. Until the end of 2013, the amount of people who have waited for more than 3 years, 80% of them are 3 to 4-person households, totaling 15,200. If the government could provide better support and encourage the under-occupied units to vacate the premises and allocate that to a 3 to 4-person household, then it can certainly help shorten the waiting time and minimize the inconvenience. The allowance for relocation for 1-person household, they can only get allowance of $4,209. That is far from sufficient. Even though the households would like to be transferred to different unit, but because allowance is not sufficient, they will try their best to delay the relocation. We propose the government should increase their allowance for CSSA subsidy recipients who are under occupied units, we should increase the subsidy so that they will vacate the premises as soon as possible. For households with disabled persons or members over the age of 70, they should be taken out of the POU list. And I think the threshold should be below the 60. So the elderly citizens between the age of 60 and 69 don't have to worry that they might have to be relocated. Other than that, some households may undergo changes in the near term. For example, their members may be married or giving birth, and we therefore propose that the government should, before considering the POU cases, should exercise discretion so that for households who are expecting to, for example, to have additions to the family, be taken out of the list. We should adjust our priorities before we can relieve the pressure on the waiting list, and so that you can really meet the pledge of applicants being able to allocate the unit within 3 years. Next, Mr. Tang Chi Sum from the Hong Kong Institute of Housing. Thank you. I represent the Hong Kong Institute of Housing. The Housing Authority, in order to ensure that precious PRH resources are allocated optimally, we support the government's proposal to, in respect of the tackling of under-occupation in PRH. But some of the tenants affected by redevelopment or who were part of the special transfer, after their household may suffer drastic changes, such as a member passing away, and they would be forced to leave the premises they live in, while at the same time they are still grieving over the passing of the family. So I think that we should adopt a more humane policy in dealing with the under occupation households. Say for households where the family size suddenly change, or for medical if there are medical grounds, we can allow these tenants a grace period of 4 to 6 months before transferring them to an appropriate PRH units. I think in doing so, the Housing Authority can be seen to be humane in applying its policy, and also minimize the grief which the affected tenants will have to suffer. Next, we have Ms. Fok Hoi Ying from the Hong Kong People's Council on Housing Policy. I think the different deputations have already pointed out the defects of the policy. For example, this policy will not result in an increase in the supply of PRH units, because when a household leave a larger unit, they will still need to live in a smaller unit. I hope the Housing Authority will consider that among the under-occupied households, we have to consider the age of its members. For the younger families, certainly there's a prospect that the household size will increase, because the members may marry and give birth. After they have been transferred to a smaller unit, they will eventually become overcrowded tenants, and you may have to offer them a larger unit later on. For senior citizens, again, if they're not too old, you transfer them out of the existing unit, and as they become old and as the health deteriorate, and after they move on to a smaller units, they may become wheelchair bound, and the facilities may not be sufficient. They may need to be taken care of, or in that case, will you need to find a larger unit to accommodate such a tenant. So I hope the Housing Authority will look at it from the long-term perspective. And ask whether or not you are creating contradictions. Do you need to deliberately hire some staff to tackle to take care of the transfer of the tenants and moving them from larger to smaller units and vice versa? At the moment, the senior citizens living in PRH are now living in fear. They don't know when it will become their turn to be moved out, and they may they may be wheelchair bound. If they are moved to a smaller unit, they cannot even move around in a smaller unit. I hope the Housing Authority will think about these issues more carefully and consider its own, workload, and also whether or not this policy will really help increase the supply of PRH units. Next, we have the concerned group of the Lim estate. Thank you. I'm sure members have some impression about the PRH blocks built with defective cement. In the 1990s, of the 843 PRH blocks, more than 729 blocks were found to contain defective concrete, and they had to be demolished. It took the government 10 years, and the government spent $1 billion of taxpayers' money to demolish those blocks and transfer the tenants to the so-called Harmony blocks. Today, I'd like to speak on behalf of the victims who have already suffered once because the government built these defective blocks. The government were not able to monitor the quality of the units they live in, and these houses have lived there for 10 to 20 years waiting for redevelopment. And now you're telling us that you're now putting forward this proposal. In 1994, when we moved to the Ngon Yam estate, there was already a lenient standard of one person should not take up more than 25 square meters. If a person move in the PRH units with the parents, they will be awarded a one-bedroom flat. But now the housing department is saying that could only be allocated to 3 to 4-person households. Why was it that at the time we only had a 2-person in family and we were given such a large unit? It was because at that time you didn't have smaller flats. If we were offered a unit of 25 square meters, then if we have moved into that unit, we wouldn't have to be worried about being called under occupied household. But the government is now gradually tightening its policy. All of a sudden you say no one can take up more than 35, 34, 30 square meters. So at any time we could, so long as one of our household member passing away, then all of a sudden will have to be transferred to another unit. For residents who live in these housing blocks built with defective concrete, we had been evicted once already, and now we are going to face the prospect of having to be transferred again. At that time, since there were not sufficient number of smaller units for top-member household, the housing department assured us that even if there were minor changes, we will not be asked to leave. I hope the housing department will explain what do you mean by a slight change in the family size? Are you talking in absolute number or in percentage terms?
Secondly, with regard to Harmony 1 public housing blocks, well, in different districts, our housing department staff have been telling them that you don't have to worry because after a number of years, the unit will be sold to you. We are not going to move you elsewhere. Well, if that's the case, then well, for those of us living in the jelly blocks, we have been misled, and that's why we made the wrong choice. All right, time's up. Next, concerned group on Lim estate, who have been forced to transfer. Well, we are from the concerned group, and as we just said, well, in the 90s, when the so-called sod buildings were found, well, that's one of the legacy of the then Hong Kong government. Well, that was the defective buildings, and because of safety or other reasons, we had to be transferred once. And at the time, we were told that we had to move out because of the wrong policy of the administration, and when we were rehoused, we were given a fast track on compassionate grounds. That's why, according to our understanding, well, for those of us who had been forced to move once, well, we might have been under-occupied. That's because of the policy of the administration back then. But then some years down the road, because of the Audit Commission's criticism against the Housing Department, that's why they are now relaunching the PUO policy. But then for those of us who had been given a larger than a standard or a larger unit, well, we are now being criticized as the PUO households But then they have totally ignored the historical background to this because we were transferred on compassionate grounds. So number one, we hope that they would give us an exemption because we were transferred in the first place because of this wrong policy of the administration back then. If we had to move again, then we would have to move twice because of the government's wrong policy. It's not our fault. And given the fact that every time you move, it will be very costly. And therefore, if we have to move again, that would also affect our retirement. Second, I'd also like to respond to some of the views that have been made. It's about the effective use of resources. It's actually related to land supply. For a long time, we have been allowing many landlords who have been hoarding up land. And therefore, when it comes to land for housing, we have a severe shortage because of that. And therefore, if we want to make the best use of land resources, the solution to this is not to pitch the situation of the PUO households against those in the waiting list. Actually, you should have targeted those who are hoarding up land. They should be taxed a very high tax rate so that more land can be put to can be used for putting up more housing units. Next, Ms. Chiang Lai Chan from the Sao Mau Ping Concern Group on households being forced to move. Well, once your unit is larger, does it mean that you have to move out right away? So we cannot just rely on one single solution in solving these problems. Well, in a community, if you want to formulate a policy, you will have to look at the people's needs, and you must also take into account how they feel. But then the housing department has taken advantage of the PUO policy to cover up its incompetency in terms of its housing policy. And therefore, you're actually looking at the per capita space per tenant in public rental housing. You're actually forcing people to transfer as soon as possible. And you've been reminding us that we should not be abusing public housing resources, but then they've been abusing their power, or they've also been abusing their own privilege. So what kind of policy is that? And in enforcing this policy so fiercely, well, have you really looked at the needs of the tenants, and have you taken into account their feelings? Do we have the ability to move? And there are many elders within our households, and many are actually psychiatric patients, and many are actually CSSA recipients, and most importantly, most of us do not have a lot of savings. So why is it that you're enforcing this without paying attention to the consequence? This will only end up in a vicious circle, and we are not well-off tenants. We simply cannot afford to move. So why can't you exercise more discretion? And yet the line is not clearly drawn. It's up to the discretion by the housing department staff, and then sometimes they would approve, at other times they would reject our application. So given the fact that you have not been very consistent, and it's up to so all the applications will have to be scrutinized by you. Given that, you should have scrapped the policy altogether. You should review it, and you should consult more widely so that you'll be able to come up with a policy which will be able to balance the interest in a community and also take into account the needs of the tenants, instead of allowing your staff to abuse their power. Only then will it be accepted by the community at large. Thank you. Next. Concern group on being forced to transfer in Kwai Fong estate. Well, I think you should adopt a more humanistic approach. In particular, if there is just a minor change to the household size, should we then be classified as PUO households? Have you considered the future of the household concerned? Should you be more accommodating and considerate? Because some of the household members might reach the age to get married, and you should allow them to stay in the original unit so that they would not be asked to move unnecessarily, because sometimes they might have children, sometimes they might get married, so it might happen within the next few years. And yet, if they are forced out, then they might become over-occupied households. And then they will have to queue up again for a larger unit. Because of their resource constraints, it would be a waste of resources. And if they have to move around time and again, then they will have to refurbish their flats again, and that would also be a waste of the resources of the housing department. Have you finished? I think we should just scrap the policy on PUO. So you finished? Yes, thank you. Next, concerned group on victims of redevelopment in Kwai Shing East Estate. Well, back in the 90s, the administration first introduced this policy on PUO, and my mom back then was 83 years old, and I was 48, and we were given a 4P unit, and that was introduced in 1992, so I was given a larger unit. And then after we moved in, 3 weeks later, my mom passed away, and then housing department immediately asked me to leave. Is that reasonable? Well, they never consider our situation. Well, they misallocated the flat to me because there was a minor change in my household size, and as a result, I was classified as a PUO household. And I did ask them if that might be a problem, and they said that, well, that's fine, because if you live in a larger unit, then later on you can buy a larger unit. And therefore we moved in, all right, for redevelopment household, all right. Let's not say that it's been a misallocation, all right. It's like the other guy who lived in a defective concrete unit, all right, because of the minor change in the household size. Once again, we have been asked to move. So is that reasonable? How come we are having this sorry state of affair in Hong Kong housing? That's because of your wrong policy. And thirdly, well, in the redevelopment of the housing estate, the housing department covered up this problem of PO household. All right, they covered up the facts, and they were never held responsible for that. So all the faults had to be shouldered by the tenants. All right, Chairman, you can ask them for further information. How many units were involved? How many of them lived in the defective concrete units? Well, many people lived in Tin Shui Wai and Tong Chong. They were allocated larger flats. So how many of them are now classified as PUO households? So have they got the figures? Can you disclose that to the media so that everybody would know what they have done, instead of treating us as if we had been abusing public housing resources? And also, to respond to some of the remarks made by the other deputations, they say that many people have been on the waiting list for many years. I think this is half-truth. All right, people might have waited for 6 years, and then they have been allocated a flat. But then as soon as they move in, if somebody passed away, then they will have to move out again. All right, if there is any change in the household size, you will become a PUO household, because inevitably you can have family members pass away. So under this policy, everybody living in public housing will have to move to different units time and again, so long as there is a change in the household size. All right, even the chief executive has been saying that we should be living in more spacious apartment. Well, of course, this is a very good policy. I hope that he can honor his promise. Finally, well, to force people to move out, I think you should scrap the policy altogether. Next, another concerned group in Tuen Mun, Ms. Pauline Chen. First of all, I'd like to respond to the remarks made by Mr. Lee from the Liberal Party, who said that, all right, the waiting list has got some 250,000 people on the list. That's why we should revise the PUO policy. You will have to know the facts. Please do not put the blame on all our housing woes on the others. Well, please do not treat this policy as a panacea to all housing problems that we face. You should not smear these PRH tenants. And the administration has been launching such decanting exercises. It's not just about PRH tenants. What is happening in NT Northeast is another example. Actually, the administration is doing this on a large scale. Please do not just put all the blame on the grassroots. all right, it's like anti-northeast. You said that you're trying to develop it because you like to resolve the housing problem. But then the land would only account for some 6%. So how many public housing units are there going to be, and how many private flats are there going to be? And 200,000 families are still waiting on the waiting list, and yet you only have 36,000 units. So you will only be able to how many households can get a unit afterwards, and yet you're actually forcing tens of thousands of people out of their own homes. So how are you going to settle that score? Please speak on the subject. All right, on this issue, well, in transferring these public housing tenants, that would also not help to solve the problem, because you're just talking about several thousand units or households. But then when compared to the 250,000 people or households on the waiting list, how can that help solve the problem? It's just a drop in the bucket. So long as there are people dying every day, then you will have this problem, because you can become a PUO household tomorrow, so long as there is a member passing away. So you're actually making it difficult for people to have a stable life. And the administration has been the culprit of not using our land resources properly. In the urban area, we have some 4,000 hectares of land which has been left idle. And then for the 110 hectares of land in the Fanling Golf Course, you have not been using it at all. And yet you're forcing public housing tenants to move out of their units. So you're actually leaving so much land idle without resolving the public housing problem. You're not putting up more flats in order to resolve the housing needs of the grassroots. You're actually forcing people to move out. So have you thought about the feelings of those being affected? Please do not think that what I'm talking about is not related to the issue under discussion, because every time when I speak out on behalf of the tenants, I really feel heartbroken. Why can't the administration do something for the tenants? Time's up. Sorry, speakers not coming through. It's me chairing the meeting, and we are continuing to listen to Deputations' views, and therefore, Mr. Lam, please allow me to chair the meeting. We have many meetings going on the same floor. That's why our meeting will continue.
Next, we have Mr. Lo Ai, Age of Resistance. Thank you. We see that the PUO policy, as ladies pointed out just now, is actually related to the development of the Northeast NT. That is, in the new territories, the government will adopt a similar method of eviction to evict the tenants living in the Northeast NT. For PRH units, the government is using this POU policy. The Representative Liberal Party has put it very well. The department should adopt a more humanistic policy. He's pointed out that PRH resources are very precious. Many people are living in very overcrowded conditions, whereas the PUO households have a per capita space of 45 square meters. But I hope you get the facts right. We can see very clearly that all along the government, through the under-occupation policy, has actually created conflict among the grassroots level. We have the problem of under-occupation. There's always been talk about insufficient supply of PRH. It's not a question of insufficient supply, but rather the problem lies with the allocation of housing units and also land resources. One can see that in order to help consortia to make huge profits, our land resources have been put into the hands of all these developers. The lies have now been, uncovered. Cheung Kong now has been hoarding, 100,000 odds of, hectares of land. Could you come back to the topic? So this basically is related to the problem of PO. The land has been given to all the private developers. Well, if the government were to build PRH in the Northeast NT, with a space of 100 hectares, they can build many PRH units. But now the government is only using 6% of the land to build PRH. That would not really resolve the problem of under-occupation. You have 250,000 people on the waiting list. If you only evict a few thousand households through the PUO policy, and after these POU households have been moved, there will be a new batch of PUO households. The under-occupation households is only one way to resolve the problem of the unfair distribution of land. So there's no problem of under-occupation because the government simply come up with this pretext in order to, hide the fact that the allocation of public resources in Hong Kong is very unjust. Thank you. Next we have Mr. Lee Yuk Ting from the Tin Shui Wai Concern Group. Thank you. Over the last 2 years, I've been living in fear because I have received a letter of transfer from the Housing Department and I have not been able to live in peace ever since. I remember 20-odd years ago, nobody wanted to move into Tin Shui Wai because it was very remote. There was a lack of facilities. The Housing Department, through different means, and tempted us to move to Tin Shui Wai by offering us larger units. So I moved from Mount Gok to Tuen Mun. Now both my parents have passed away, and I'm now living alone. And the Housing Department is now saying that I have to leave because I'm a PUO, and I don't think that is acceptable. And now the Tin Shui Wai has become a mature community. The government is reneging on its earlier promise. The senior staff of the Housing Department have come up with all these impractical, solutions, and they are complicated the issue. The Housing Department should ensure that the public can live in peace, but now they are instead creating trouble, inconvenience for the people, and many people are living, in fear because of the prospect of their having to be transferred. You only give them an allowance of several $1,000s to help them relocate, and they simply cannot, and when we have to move, then we have to incur a lot of expenses. Today, you want to transfer these unoccupied households. Tomorrow, there will be a new batch of PUO households. How are you going to have so many smaller units available? Why don't you adopt a protective approach, identify more land, build more PRH units in order to satisfy the housing needs of the hundreds of thousands of households? Thank you. Next, we have Miss Ryder Zhang from the Lee Moon Concern Group. Ms. Zhang, please, let us see your name card. Thank you. I'd like to ask everyone present whether we have the right of residence. Those living in PRH units have the right to residence. All of us are eligible to live in PRH units. Why is the government calling us PUO? Why do they have this under-occupation policy? And the policy has been changing all the time, and now it's being extended to senior citizens. We want to know whether the government has thought of ways to resolve the problem of housing supply. They always stick to the three texts that there is a lack of land supply, and they now resort to this policy of under-occupation to resolve the problem. Is that reasonable? The housing authorities say that they've been trying to identify land. Have they done that? No, because all along, they really, have not come up with any feasible, methods or solutions. The government is now. I really object to the way the government treat these under-occupied households. So, for those who are under the age of 60, they simply don't have the means to move to different premises. Why then should they be evicted? Well, these people have once, participated in the labor force of Hong Kong. They've contributed to the development of Hong Kong. So, but now the policy is now, putting a lot of pressure on the PRH units. do the people of Hong Kong know that the government is now using different excuses to force those of us who have been, to leave the units we live in simply because we were called PUO households. Next, we have Mr. Choi Wai Pio representing the from the Law Ltd. I think the PUO policy is really unacceptable. I think it's a reasonable expectation for people to live in to have a more generous space allocation in where they live. Is it the case that the people who support this policy believe that people should live in very crowded conditions? The PRE units is not actually spacious at all. Xu Leung said that people should have more space allocation per head. I mean, it's part of our life. I mean, the unit is not a dormitory or a hotel. We cannot leave at any time. People who come with this policy, do they have a conscience? Have they considered the feeling of the PRH tenants? It is the government's duty to ensure that people can live, in stability and peace. But now this policy is causing trouble for the PRH units. Previously, LC2 had accused the housing authority for not doing so properly. One example would be the buildings, PRX blocks built with defective concrete. Normally these blocks can be used for 40-50 years, but those who were built in the 1970s are all demolished because of improper supervision. They let the developers to use defective concrete to build those units. When they demolished those buildings, it was found that none of these blocks satisfy the standard. The ICAC at the time did investigate into the case, and when Lee Wing Tai was being interviewed, he said that the housing authority was being very lenient to the unscrupulous developers, whereas for the victims, they treated them very harshly. To the government's act, the government really is, reneging on its own promise. The housing authority is, telling lies. The policy really is the source of all the nuisance. Whereas for the law-abiding victims of at the time have to show the consequences. The housing authority is not willing to take up its responsibility and is passing the responsibility on to the tenants. Many people think that PRH tenants are sticking to the units, but nobody want to live in the PRH units if they have a choice. We're just riding on public buses and not Mercedes-Benzes. Those who do not accuse us, and put the blame on the low strata. So I hope that this extremely unreasonable policy should be scrapped. All right, all the deputations have now spoken, and now we invite the administration to respond to the views expressed. Chairman, Mr. Lee Kok Wing, I'd like to respond to the major points raised by the deputations, and I'll defer to my colleagues to comment on some of the other details. First of all, the standard for under occupation has not changed since 1992. The standard has always been consistent. For example, for a one-person household, they should not take up more than 25 square meters, 35 for two-person households, except that operationally, where we are now dealing with the households with the most serious under occupation. So the threshold has been, changed from 35, 34, and then 30. So we're not changing the goalposts. We're not tightening the standard. The standard has always been consistent. Given the population aging, and because of most households are small families, we have a serious problem of under-occupation. According to our statistics, we have more than 50,000 under-occupied households. Compare with the number of households on the waiting list. We now have more than 120,000 on the waiting list. We're talking about a large percentage. If one person lives in a one-bedroom flat, it's not a question of +1 -1. It's not the case that there's no benefit. If that one person surrounded his, unoccupied flat, then we can accommodate more people in the same unit. So the same unit can actually satisfy double or 3 times the number of people who require PRH units. So that is why the Housing Authority must strictly enforce the policy on regarding under-occupation. Many deputations said that we need to be, compassionate and humanistic. We should take stock of the special needs of the households and adjust our policies accordingly and exercise our discretion. I'd like to reiterate once again that the Housing Authority has always done that. Whenever we see households suffering from short-term financial difficulties, or if their families are about to marry, or if they're expecting to have a newborn, and if they have members who may join them from the mainland, or if they have bought a HOS flat, or if something should happen to the household members, and if they want to stay on living in the existing unit, or if they require more additional offers other than the 3 initial offers, we will always try our best to help and be as lenient as possible in helping these tenants.
All along, the HA would treat elderly tenants, i.e. those over 60, as non-priority households. That's why they would be put at the back of the list. In other words, it's very unlikely that they would have to move shortly. But then we also said that for those over 70, they would be taken out of the list altogether. So their cases will not be dealt with altogether. And some said that the threshold should be lowered to 65 or 60. Well, last time when the subcommittee discussed this, it was agreed that they would further discuss it. So I'll be bringing this back for them to consider next month. And some deputations also talk about the over-occupied households. So I'll be giving you more figures so that there would not be any misunderstanding. Well, in the past, we talked about tens of thousands of such cases. But then during the past few years, we've been trying our best to help them. And now there are only about 3,000 such households left. And according to our analysis, for the overcrowded households, well, most of them are overcrowded because of personal reasons. For example, they don't want to move out of their own or existing units. And if they are willing to do so, we do have resources for them to move to a bigger unit. So other than the 5.5 square meter, that is the standard, well, during the past few years, the HA has also put in place a measure that is to improve the personal space for the tenants. So long as the per person space is below 7 square meters, then they can apply for rehousing. So we do have this policy in place. So even if they are not classified as overcrowded household, they will also be given a chance to move to a bigger flat. So here I'd like to stress that we have always adopted a people-based policy. We are willing to listen to their views, and where resources permit, we'll try our best to do the best for our tenants. So I'll defer to my colleague who will give you more details. Yes, Mr. Lam. Thank you, Chairman. Well, just now, as the Deputy Director said, all along we have adopted an orderly approach in dealing with the PUO cases. And as we have just said, other than people giving birth, or people who are getting married, or where there is a change in the household size, whether there might have been addition or deletion to the number, or even if there are medical concerns, well, we will adopt a pragmatic approach, taking into account the circumstances of the households and also our policy. So please rest assured that the Housing Department will definitely follow that policy through in enforcing this policy on PUO households. Yes, we do have many people on the waiting list. And under our allocation policy, the biggest allocation will be no more than 20 square meter per person. So if you look at the figure, when compared to the situation of the PUO households, there is already quite a gap between them. And then for the OU households or the PUO households, well, the units that they are living in, let's say if it's a one-bedroom or two-bedroom units, well, those could have been allocated to 3 or even 4P family. So as we just said, if we are able to allocate those units in a more effective and flexible manner, then actually we could house more people in public housing. Just now, some deputations and concerned groups have given us a lot of valuable comments. For example, some suggested that Section 19 of the Housing Ordinance should be amended in order to scrap this policy altogether. And some also said that the policy should incorporate some incentives so that we can encourage some UO households to move out. For example, there could also be ex gratia payment or rehousing allowance. Well, those can be considered. I hope that you can all understand this. In fact, for the UO cases, our approach is that we don't want to over-worry the tenants. But then, as you have said, that is something that the HA will have to deal with. So I'll defer to Mr. Choi to see if he has anything to add. Yes, I'd also like to supplement. Just now, quite a number of deputations mentioned that for people aged between 60 and 69, after they have learned that they are classified as UO cases, well, they would be very worried. Here, I'd like to clarify our position. In fact, in the next few years, every year, we can only deal with about 1,000 PUO cases every year. So we are still having some 6,000 backlog cases. Well, for households with family members aged between 60 and 69, given the fact that they are already put to the back of a queue, so they can already see that for households with family members aged between 60 and 69, in the next few years, they will not have to move out of their existing units. So they can stay in their present unit at least for the next few years. I have a question. And I'd like to see if you can respond to that, because just now about 4 or 5 deputations raised this same question. That is, in the early years, when they moved into the so-called defective concrete units of the housing department, at that time they had to move out and they had to move into the harmony blocks, and the units in the harmony blocks were somewhat larger than the standards. In some cases, they might have been allocated a one-bedroom unit. And now, so that's the historical background, and as a result, they've been classified as UO cases. And now they have to move again. And they think that it's unfair to them, because back then they were required to move once because of the defective concrete units, and now if they are classified as UO cases and have to move again, that would be grossly unfair. And as we all know, if you have to move all the time, it would be very costly because some of the furniture items cannot be used again and you will have to buy some new ones. So can you consider their cases as exceptional cases because they were required to move because of your policy? So they had no choice but move back then. And then there was another case when they were allocated this unit. You told them that because it's in a new development area and it's in the suburban area, that's why the units were more spacious. So you allocated the flat to them in the first place, and then now they are classified as UO cases. So it's very much the same problem. So what is your response to those allegations? Chairman, let me respond. I understand that several concerned group representatives said that they had moved into larger units, and now because of a change in the household size, they now have fewer members in the households. As a result, they've been classified as UO households because of the difference in time, in location, and also in the design of the buildings. Some units might be larger, others might be smaller. Well, in our view, as far as public rental housing tenants are concerned, the allocation standard should be consistent. Well, many deputations have said that if they are classified as UO cases and if they have to move as a result of that, then they would have to incur some money in the relocation exercise. And they said that for the removal allowance and also decoration allowance, if they could be offered some ex gratia payment, then that might be better. Well, I can convey this back to the relevant committee for consideration to see if we can offer more assistance to those with financial hardship. So I'll bring this back to the HA for consideration. But then you have not addressed the point. Well, because of the defective concrete units, they had to move once and now they have to move again. So they have come from Leimokshi, Onyam, and other housing estates. And for tenants living in Leimokshi after they have moved into the Harmony 1 block and they've been asked to go into Onyam estate because they've been told that this would be an estate designated for the sitting tenant purchase scheme, but then you have not honored your promise. So can you respond to those allegations? Chairman, yes, let me supplement on that. Well, these are redevelopment cases in the reception estate. Well, as far as, for 2P families, for 2P units, in the redevelopment project, we may not have enough 2P units for allocation to 2P households. So, for the redevelopment project, we have to be flexible enough so that for 2P units, if we don't have enough such units for allocation, then we will have to have this interim arrangement whereby these 2P households can be relocated in situ. So that's what we're trying to achieve in our redevelopment projects. So we are not trying to use these units as an incentive to lure them to move into them. That's because we did have some flexibility with regard to the units for allocation. So we did offer those units with 1 bedroom to these families to move in. So that's precisely what they've been saying. So these so-called UO cases, the fault should not have been put on them. Well, that's because of your initial policy, and they've been made to shoulder the consequence. So they have now become UO cases, and now they are asked to move to smaller units, and they have been made to bear the consequence of your policy flaws. So you should go back and consider this. You should have dealt with this more appropriately, because just now, as we have heard from some of the deputations, as far as this council is concerned, at the complaints division, we have also received some complaints, and they've asked for sympathetic treatment. So please do consider them. All right, the floor is now open to members. So how many members would like to ask questions? Please raise your hands.
So I can allocate the time with Alice Mack, Leung Chi Chung. Anyone else? If not, I think we can allow 4 minutes per member, because we're scheduled to finish at 3:55 for the first session. Okay, Ms. Mack. We heard I think the answer given by the Housing Department is really infuriating. When you needed to redevelop, you say you needed flexibility. In order to proceed with redevelopment and proceed with a plan, you needed that flexibility. But when you need to deal with the problem of under-occupation, you can't have flexibility, you say. As we've heard from the deputations just now, many of them live in Kwai Ching, and they were affected by the redevelopment in Lei Mok Shi, Kwai Fong, Shek Lei, Shek Yam, Kwai Shing estates. All those estates, people who live in estates, I mean, they had to be redeveloped, and because they were built with defective materials, and you demolish them very quickly, and you allow a lot of flexibility. But now the Kai Fongs have to shoulder the consequence. You say that at that time you had the flexibility because you needed to redevelop those estates. Can you now also flexibly deal with the PUOs who were once affected by redevelopment? Chairman, let me explain the current policy, which my colleague had already alluded to. Putting redevelopment aside, people who move into PRH units through different channels, they're different. The Housing Department all along would first of all look at the resources it has on hand, and will try to make the best use of those resources to allocate the PRH units. Sometimes the tenants may deviate from certain allocation criteria in order to make good use of resources. For the over-occupation policy, we no longer look at the unit which you were first allocated. Let's say if you owe the rents, and also for the demerit system, I think we apply the same consistent policy, and that includes the policy in respect of under-occupation and overcrowded households. The chairman already asked us to take this message back to the Housing Authority, and we certainly do that. Director, you say you need to deal with it more fairly. We just want you to be fair to the tenants, because they had already suffered from your previous mistake. I'm not referring to yourself, but the Housing Department built all these blocks with defective materials, and because of that they had to be moved once already. I wouldn't say you actually try to lure them to move and offer them a larger unit, and now years later you say they have to leave because they have been over allocated with space, and I don't think that is fair. I understand that after they've lived there for some time, they're all PRH tenants, but I understand that very often And the problem they now face is because of the inconsistency of the housing department's policies. In the 1990s, there were insufficient small units. The housing department built most of the buildings they built were large units, and they allocated the large units to those on the waiting list and said you would let them live in the larger units. But now you're able to build smaller units, and as a result, you want to move some of the PUO households out of the larger units. So I don't know why your policy is changing all the time, but I hope you will be fair to the tenants and really be flexible, be more flexible, so that they don't have to be moved again and again. If they have the means to move out, live in larger premises, fine. But if they're asked to move into a smaller unit, it would be very inconvenient for them. Lan Chi Chang, I think the problem of over-occupation has caused under-occupation has caused a lot of concern on the part of PRH tenants. And many deputations already pointed this out just now. When you formulated your policy, of course you have all the justification. You're saying that you need to allocate resources in a reasonable manner. But why are you changing the threshold from the age of 60 to 70? Although you say those who are 60 will be put on the back of the list or the queue. But the problem is that these PRH tenants who are senior citizens, they have been living in the community for the longest period of time. They already have an attachment to the community they live in. Once you transfer them to another estate, it will cause a lot of harm to them. So I don't know. For those who are over the age of 60, I don't think they should be put under the classified as PUOs. Otherwise, there will be, people may even commit suicide because of that. So, and the housing department will be blamed. So would you therefore consider your policy again in respect of people over the age of 60? I don't think you should put them at the back of the queue of the PUO households. I have received many appeals for assistance. Some of the tenants are already complaining and expressing that they are very worried. Some Tin Shui Wai residents also were right. That is, in the early stage, for those living in Tin Yu and Tin Shui, the southern part of Tin Shui Wai, they were actually allocated a unit which were given an additional 30 to 40 square feet of space, and they were given a more generous amount of space. But now that after living there for some time, some of the children might have left and so on. So as a result, they become PUO households. Now, given the special policy you adopted at the time, and would you deal with these residents in a compassionate manner, those that is you offer them with such concessions earlier? We are not tightening the policy. Previously, for those starting from the age of 40, they would be non-PUO households. They will be put at the back of the list, except that last year the Housing Authority has included those, taken out those over the age of 60 and those who are disabled. They are taken out of the list altogether. They are not even put at the back of the list. So actually there has been a relaxation and not a tightening of the criteria. The argument now is whether or not we should further relax the criteria. And we've been asked to relay the request to the Housing Authority that the threshold should be lowered to 60, and we certainly take it back to the Housing Authority. Secondly, for households who are allocated more space for different reasons, I'd like to add that we're willing to listen to different voices. The Housing Authority also has its own views, of course. Other than what we've heard from the deputations just now, there are other people who are saying that we all live in Tin Shui Wai, no matter what the reason you were, that you were allocated in a unit Tin Shui Wai. Why is it that you have to, you don't have to move and I have to? But anyway, we're willing to continue to listen to the public's views. Mr. Raymond Wong, I think the housing policy of the administration has been subject to a lot of criticisms, and those of us on this panel and also those sitting on the working group on long-term housing strategy. I think how many units are you building every year? By amending the policy regarding under-occupation to increase supply of PRH, I think this is actually, applying the wrong medicine. You simply cannot resolve the problem because you still have the fundamental problem of supply. You have more than 250,000 people on the waiting list, and you still cannot resolve the problem. And Jacky LIM always, issue blank checks. I think the reality is right before our eyes. Talking about under-occupation households, the audit report also mentioned that the government there are problems with the way the government deals with these under-occupation households, and now you are giving a response and amending the policy a second time. The question is that you're not being humanistic enough. Some of the approach you've taken in dealing with some cases, when you need to transfer these households, you need to, start from the humanistic angle, but you don't do that. Your system is simply, inhuman. When people need to move, of course, they will have to incur expenses, and the allowance may not be sufficient to cover the expenses required. And some households may have just fitted out their unit, and they don't want to have the money spent in vain. And some houses don't want to be moved because they have to look after the parents who live in the vicinity. I think we've come across many such cases at the district level. I think these problems simply cannot resolve. So shouldn't you be more humane? Shouldn't you tackle some of these problems? In fact, you can do it, but you're simply being rigid. You're like a machine, right? You operate automatically, and you are unwilling to exercise discretion to deal with these problems flexibly. When I handle similar cases, sometimes I have to go through many rounds of correspondence in dealing with the officials before the problem could be resolved. So when you move these households, you have to consider the fact that the household members may need to take care of the parents living in the vicinity, and bear in mind that the children attend schools in the same area, and so on. When there are such cases, then you should really deal with them with discretion. Regarding the disabled and the senior citizens, of course, we should, I accept that we should, consider the special needs, and I think the policy should also cover those with family members suffering from chronic diseases and so on. While we cannot object this policy, but in applying the policy, you need to be more humane. As the example I gave just now, I gave you a few examples. Shouldn't you come up with some ways to deal with these such cases? The important thing is discretion. If within a household you have a member who suffers from chronic disease, you should incorporate them under cases with requiring long-term care, and then even discretion may not be enough. Everyone wants to live in peace and prosperity, but then the government is now saying that the government is claiming to build subsidized housing in Northeast NT, but they can never give us a number. It's always lying. Time is up. I think we've overrun already for this session. So I think we can wrap up our discussion now. And we'll take a break and reconvene after 10 minutes.